And in the smoothness cocktail, there is aldehydes and many other substances that even tobacco companies don't understand. So, but when you talk about dependence, it's not just a sensorial or biological experience, it's more than that. It's about a ritualistic experience. It is about touching your Zippo lighter in the pocket. So it's not even the cigarette per se. It is about the social aspect of the smoking. You know, some people just love to smoke in company. They just do it. And they have excuses for it. Let's have a beer, let's have a coffee, and let's grab a cigarette, you know?
Yes, Bill S5, as it's written, puts us pretty much in the category with tobacco. What is your position or your opinions on e-liquid not being tobacco or being tobacco, and the merit of the e-liquid as a vaping industry as a standalone category with proper guidelines, with proper regulations, with GMP standards? I'd like to have some feedback on that, please.
I mean, there's no doubt, as has been echoed by the panel, that we need some level of regulation. The trick of the trade is that regulation needs to be proportionate and not overburdening. Otherwise, it's going to be crazy. Just let me offer you an example. When in the automobile industry, they created the Euro standard, I'm not sure whether you are familiar with that. It was a standard for diesel emission. In late 70s, it was created a Euro standard 1. This Euro standard, every 5 years more or less, is being updated. Now we have the Euro 7 for these diesel cars. Let's try for a single minute to imagine what would have happened to the automobiles industry if we would have introduced the Euro 7 straight away, because it's very strict, very restrictive. We would have destroyed the automobile industry. So even when we talk about standards and we talk of something that needs to be proportionate, needs to be just, needs to be protective and safeguarding consumers, we still need to think that this is a voyage to perfection maybe, who knows, but it needs to be graduated over time. And I mean, at the moment in Europe, we are, for example, the only constituents that we want to analyze in the emissions of electronic cigarettes are basically aldehydes, because the literature tells us to do so, and metals, apart from nicotine, which is an obligatory requirement from the TBD. So I think just by looking into two constituents in the vapor, we are just doing the right job. We are just starting protecting customers. But maybe we're not measuring everything, and maybe we're missing some unknown unknowns, okay, that we need the evidence to start limiting and restricting unknown unknowns. Otherwise, we'll ban the product and it game's over, and we'll forget about that.
And Derek, maybe you could answer that in a different way. You were critical of S5, but how would you regulate e-cigarettes?
Well, I hesitate to start making policy prescriptions, but I guess the kind of the backstop that I'm familiar with is these sorts of undue sorts of limitations that start restricting people's rights. And that it's difficult to say beforehand what that might be, but you know, this was a great example about the regulation of diesel engines and their emissions. You can only make the regulations based upon what you know now, and it can't destroy and gut the industry, because again, it's the background of harm reduction that's underneath all of this, is that something we know is less harmful. Is it perfect? Well, probably not. We don't know. And I mean, even looking at the 95% less harmful statistic, there's that 5% in there. It's, you know, no one should be vaping, but it's no one should be smoking. We prefer you vape. So anything that keeps people smoking, incentivizes smoking, makes it easier to continue smoking, that's where the regulations start running afoul of the Constitution.
And Dr. Ostiguy, your patients, COPD, heart disease, what kind of regulatory protection do they need? Do they need anything from vaping?
Well, their main concern is certainly that they want to buy a good quality product. This is because there have been so many vape shops around selling all sorts of stuff without any control. So one of their main concerns, and one of the first questions they usually ask us when the smokers come to the clinic, they're not waiting for us to suggest the electronic cigarette. They've already bought the electronic cigarette and they're asking us, well, is it safe to use it? Am I buying the good thing? And one of the things we haven't been insisting upon enough, I think, this morning is the fact that e-cigarette users, they need education. I would say that especially in the older population, 50% were not using the electronic cigarette properly. They didn't know how to.
So true, very true at that point.
Often to change the battery, how to get the proper concentration of nicotine that they would need, get the proper flavor. So they need to be educated, and the way it's proposed at the moment is that it's going to be almost impossible, not only to deliver the scientific facts about the harm reduction of the electronic cigarette, but they need education about how to use it. And this is, unfortunately, it's not done.
Maybe they should spend as much time in the vape shop as the sex shop next door. And Dr. First, you also spoke about that in your talk, about the need to about product quality. Are the products out there now, are they good, or are they just, do we know if they're good?
I don't think that we can trust self-regulation by the industry. We need to have a professional industry. I'm not sure if we have it right now, that just by seeing the level of fragmentation, I mean, there are thousands and thousands of different manufacturers which are very small companies, and they cannot invest on promoting safety in the way that they should. We're just lucky that the nature of the e-cigarette product is such that even the worst quality cigarette is going to be by far less harmful than smoking. I'm almost certain about that. But of course, as I said, the number one priority is to ensure some quality standards so that there are some minimum levels of acceptable product quality. I'm sure that if you look at the market, the very fragmented market, you're going to see very good quality products, but very bad quality products. The problem with the consumer is, how will I choose the good quality ones, and how will I distinguish them from the bad quality? And that's why we need the regulation. And that's why we need a minimum set of standards that all products are going to comply. And that is a very successful thing that the EU regulation did. It was quite cheap, quite feasible, even small companies could comply, not very restrictive, but it has set some minimum standards. And that should be the main purpose of the regulation, not to protect people who don't need to be protected.
So I'm hearing we need consumer protection legislation rather than health legislation.
Yes, which is, I'm not concerned to a level that I would be hesitant to recommend to a smoker to quit by using e-cigarettes. I'm not sure if it's any, measurable benefit from using a 96% less harmful product from 95 or a 94% less harmful product. Because the main goal and the main issue that we're dealing with is to succeed in having a smoker quit as soon as possible. Yeah. And quit, completely, not smoke not even one cigarette. And for patients with already established smoking-related disease, that's even more important, And the benefit in their health is going to be seen much faster compared to a young person who is smoking and is making the streets. I think this should be the main goal and the main purpose of any regulation. And I think that was one case where the EU regulation was, I would say, quite successful despite the disadvantages.
I know there's lots of questions, but we have lots of time, so don't panic. So we'll start with you, ma'am.
Okay, we always hear about educating. We want to do. How can we do that? I mean, I live in Quebec, so we can talk about it. We can. So how can we? Who should be educating? How can we educate?
Just to be more precise, the Quebec law, we have a Quebec law that's passed in 2015, prevents anybody from making any communication about crucial risk or relative risk on electronic cigarettes.
Yeah,
So,
so-
with that law, how can we work within it?
Well,
Yeah, exactly.
Let's imagine for a second that I cannot communicate on the changes in health style, lifestyle. I mean, I'm exercising and nobody can communicate the pros and cons of exercising. You know, after MI, after a heart attack. Where this should lead to? We really need to start and educating and the member of parliament, health authorities, our peers, bake shop owners, clients, smokers. We really need to start having a kind of mass media campaign, believe it or not. Believe it or not, we need a mass media campaign where there is a third party authority where people who are in favor and against, they try to converge on messages that they are appropriate for a mass media campaign. That's the only possible way. And the importance of the educating parents, if you don't educate the parents, the kid will have an electronic cigarette. You know? It's a kid in per se cannot get an electronic cigarette. Mainly because there are age restrictions, because it doesn't have a credit card. So how the heck a 16 or 14 years old ends up having an electronic cigarette? Clearly, the parents or somebody in the family has allowed them to have it. What's their justification for that? Oh, but they are less harmful. Fine. But the point is, education is missing, and it's a very important point. With education, you can achieve so much with so little.
So Dr. Ostiguy, you talked about your patients want education. Where are they getting it?
well, at the moment, as a matter of fact, physicians are in a very poor position to provide education, unfortunately, and very often we have to rely on some vape shops who we thought were doing the proper education to their customers. But again, this is why regulation is so important. I'm told that in France, people running vape shops have to have a sort of certificate allowing them to have enough knowledge to sell the electronic cigarette. I don't know.
It's a goal, but we're not there yet.
Yeah. So, I mean, this could be something that could be done. Whether it's going to be asking for too much, I don't know. But I mean, to have a certificate of competence to sell electronic cigarettes, just like the pharmacists have the competence to sell drugs. I think it would be one way of doing it. Or, I mean, the vape shop owners could organize some conference where they could get their education, like we do in any scientific organization. May I take this opportunity to ask a question from the Parliamentary Commission in 2015 when they did a report, they said they were not suggesting to introduce, to put the electronic cigarette into the law. They said that it could be done into a regulation. Because apparently it's easier to change a regulation than to change a law. Is it something that remains possible? Is it possible to go back? Is it unrealistic? Do we know why the government decided not to adopt a regulation instead of adopting a law, or suggesting, proposing a law?
I don't know the answer to that, but I can say philosophically, I don't think it's a great idea at all to trust the government to get it right in the regulations. And now I would actually say that is what predominantly is happening here. So we have this, here I have S5 in front of me. And one of the things that sticks out to me in the vaping section immediately is regulations. The governor and council may make regulations. And then it goes on and lists all sorts of different circumstances, including standards for sensory attributes, testing methods, all sorts of things. This is, for the most part, it's going to be figured out later. And now is the point when the government is transparent. This is the most transparent moment that we're ever going to have with this bill. Once this bill becomes law, and all these regulations are made by governor and council, we have far less input. We may not know as quickly when things happen, and the industry won't be consulted, I don't think, necessarily. And all it takes is a change in leadership, and things can change drastically. So hoping to get things right in the regulations is I think it's a poor strategy. I think getting the bill right at the get-go is the best strategy, because you can find the carpet yanked out from under your feet pretty quickly if that's your plan. And I think that that's been proven true in many other areas, other pieces of legislation.
So go ahead.
Thank you. If I can just respond to that, and then I did have a more broad question. The act or the bill acknowledges that the evidence is imperfect, and it's my understanding that a lot of those details are left in the regs so that things can be changed as it can be more nimble as the evidence and more research emerges. So if we were to enshrine in legislation today that the maximum concentration of e-liquid could only be 18 milligrams per milliliter, and then we find out in a year that in fact that's quite detrimental and we should allow it up to 36 or whatever, we're stuck. Whereas if it's in the regulation, then there's a lot more ability to be nimble.
I'm not sure that stuck is the word, because the legislation can be changed through the regular amending processes.
Right, but the Tobacco Act, it took 20 years for any substantial changes to come, right? It was passed in '89 and here we are. So, you know, we have no assurances that the act would be opened up in any, you know,
so,
quick time.
yeah, I can appreciate what you're saying, but now from the other perspective. The other perspective is we need to grant the government the capacity to act with rapidity when we already know that this is very imperfect and poorly drafted legislation. I'm not sure granting the government the capacity to act quickly is a good strategy. Let's fix the legislation. Let's get it right from the beginning. And you know, the other thing is there seems to be great confusion in the vaping community about whether or not there are actually like flavor bans. There's quite clearly a flavor ban.
Well, so I wanted to ask a wider question because a few of the panelists have said, I don't really see much difference in regulation between e-cigarettes and tobacco. So from what I've understood through a few conversations with Health Canada and the public health organizations, I represent the Non-Smokers' Rights Association, and we are intimately involved with this process. So if we look at all the different categories of how tobacco and vaping products are being regulated, they are getting a separate definition. They are getting separate regulations around packaging. So we're getting, hopefully, plain and standardized packaging for tobacco, whereas it'll be determined by regulation. But it's not, I highly doubt we're gonna have plain and standardized packaging.
You have more faith than I do, let's put it that way.
So, and
it's
then for warnings, not graphic health warnings the way we have for tobacco. Flavors aren't banned. What the ban is around the prohibition, or sorry, the promotion of the flavors. And you're right, there absolutely is confusion around the flavors and so forth. But the fact is that there will be certain flavors permitted, whereas with tobacco we're going in the opposite direction, right? We just
Again,
banned menthol.
it's, you know, if you look at the schedules at the back of the act, it says the governor and council can amend them at any point.
So let's look at some other examples, right? So advertising and promotion, lifestyle advertising is allowed. There's going to be, in fact, right now there's no regulatory authority at all on advertising. So it can be TV, radio, billboards, the internet, you name it. Everything is on the table right now with no regulatory authority. So that is the flip side of what we have with tobacco. And there's lots of other examples, right? Tobacco, there's high taxation, whereas e-cigarettes are not being regulated as tobacco, so there won't be those excise taxes. So the taxation, the price differential will be there as well. So helping understand some of the, where, you know, how you see there being a problem in terms of not differentiating those two products by regulation.
Okay, first off, I think that one of the big problems will be that this is criminal legislation that will supersede everything across Canada. Now, that being said, the Calgary bylaw will continue to stand. So when Calgary restricts vape shops and what they can do, there's still that carve out for them under the Constitution to be able to, manage that sort of activity under the province regulations in Section 92.
So you're saying that bylaws will stand, bylaws will supersede?
No. This supersedes. So anything that is contradictory with this piece of legislation will be superseded. But this will apply as a blanket across the country. So Red Deer, Alberta, great example, I'm familiar with it. It's illegal there to actually demonstrate products in store. You can't demonstrate to a consumer. And so this does not do anything to change that.
Well, that's
That's
totally
problematic.
different from my understanding, though.
Well, I'm sorry about your understanding that.
Well, no, but through discussions with Health Canada, so this is interesting.
Well,
right?
you see,
So
Health
we look at-
Canada is not likely familiar with what Red Deer, Alberta is
No,
doing.
they are aware, they are.
Can we talk about section 39, you
Let's see
brought
if
it
we
up,
can get
30.4.
get somebody another, just
Sure.
someone else a chance to ask a question, we can, this sounds like a parliamentary debate. Okay, get you both elected for your respective ridings and we'll have it out in the house. See what happens.
Question is, we were talking about education and everything. I saw with my own eyes in Quebec, a few people that are here that went into the commission and said, do not put the electronic cigarettes into the tobacco products. And they did. It's like they never listened to anything. It's like their mind was already made, set, and they did what they had to do because they thought it was right. And you saw across the world many things like that happen. Do you think we really have a chance here in Canada to make something change? And if it's possible, how do we do that? Because we always hear, contact your MPs, you do this, do that. Yeah. We tried everything and nothing works. So, any suggestions, please?
So Dr. Pulmonologist, let me ask you that question this way. Are scientists having an influence on politicians? Can you change their minds with science?
Basically,
It should be
yes.
simple, same, of course. With the proper evidence, everything could happen, but unfortunately, this is not the case. There's always a hidden agenda. And the beauty of this is that you really need to try to understand what is this agenda, because otherwise there'll be never a constructive discussion. I always say, I try to put myself in somebody else's shoes. I really know to understand what is the shape of the shoes, what is the size number, otherwise we'll never be able to do that. But to cut a long story short, science on its own doesn't really help. I mean, politicians do not listen to scientists or to experts most of the time, unless you can leverage their interest on secondary issues. For example, when I start talking about regulation and they understand that by implementing regulation they can set up authorities that can leverage taxation just because of that, because there's a level of control and things like that, they start to be quite attentive to my discussion. They forgot everything I said about science, about saving lives, and about improvement of that.
Politicians react to public pressure. It's not necessarily because they have a hidden agenda. It's just because the public pressure comes from one area. They react to it. And that's l'actualité.
There is another issue that they have an inherent fear about potential
But where that
risks and
message is
problems.
coming.
But so there, yes, but the thing is that you can't ignore the evidence just because of these fears. These fears will exist, and they exist in any other product. The key issue is whether you should use the theoretical fears evidence coming out.
But let's
It's not an easy task.
be realistic. The problem is that we are speaking from our side of the trench. but there'll be champions on the other side of the trench which will bombard the same regulators with different opposite issues. The funny thing is that we have we have the same evidence, and the same evidence can be interpreted in completely different way by different group of scientists. New Zealand, when they said, how comes that New Zealand, with the same sets of evidence, has come with a completely different sets of legislation from Australia, which is the next door neighbors? Very simple. They have a champion. His name is Simon Chapman, and he's extremely influential at the political level. That's the reason why they have a legislation that puts them back 5 years behind the rest of the world.
So you've been very patient, yes?
It's okay, thank you very much. I first want to thank the panel for a very informative discussion here. I've learned a lot today. And more importantly, I want to thank all of you for dedicating yourselves to offering risk reduction health awareness to our community, because that means a lot to me. That's what I'm all about. What I do know is that there's definitely anecdotal evidence to prove that vaping is better than smoking tobacco. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence. So, to be responsible, to be mindful, I think what we need to do pretty much is do post-market research, get that information, that education, give it to our community so they can make an informed decision on whether or not vaping is right for them. So I don't know where to go from here. This is my first day here. I'm the founder of National Access Canada, so I've been, offering risk reduction health awareness to my community for many years. But as champions, we just have to get together with champions and just keep educating our community, helping those that are the most vulnerable in our community. And I think the best way to do that is through our physicians, maybe the College of Family Physicians of Canada, Health Canada. Let's start discussing it with our physicians and educating them. I've been doing that with medical marijuana for 5 years, and I think that might be the best way to go. Anyways, thank you very much.
No. I fully agree. The family physicians are much less under the influence of the big drug, big pharma. For a simple reason that all the physician champions in the academia are under the influence of the respective scientific societies and research societies, and these are automatically funded mainly by, guess what, big pharma. So unfortunately, we have to play the game with the rules that we have.
But we saw research this morning that the physicians aren't.
Yes. The general practitioners are really looking for information, but you'd be surprised to know that out of the 117 specialists who answered our survey, most of them were surgeons. And among the surgeons, most of them were plastic surgeons. So, but the pneumologists, the cardiologists, the oncologists didn't answer significantly our survey. They want to prescribe drugs. That's the end of it. And to answer Mr. Boutin's remark, and a commentary to François also, politicians are also influenced by their personal experience, and I must tell you that in Quebec this has played a big role.
The problem of misconceptions in the healthcare community, the healthcare professionals, is a world phenomenon. It's not only here. We did a study last year among healthcare professionals in Greece, and 60% consider that nicotine has a major or very important contribution to smoking-related lung cancer. Well, nicotine is not a carcinogen. The same response was seen in GPs in the UK, in Sweden, in Norway, in the US. So it's a worldwide phenomenon. Even more interestingly, concerning their approach towards recommending e-cigarettes. You know that 40% of the healthcare professionals that we asked in Greece would not recommend e-cigarettes to smokers who have failed to quit with currently approved medications. That's important how the question was phrased. So they would not recommend e-cigarettes to someone who has failed with anything else. So there are no other options. So basically I'm telling them, It's your problem that you're trying to quit with all other methods. Just continue smoking.
I think you should advertise your blog in several Greek hospitals and see what happens.
But Dr. Farsalinos, I was on a radio program, and I was interviewed by a cardiologist, and he said, well, Dr. Ostiguy, don't you think that nicotine is causing cancer? I was quite surprised. I said, well, we have a problem because anybody can get nicotine with patches, inhaler, gum, lozenges in the pharmacy without prescription. It's available on the shelf, and you think it's causing. I didn't deal about it. But I mean, there's poor education even amongst the physicians, and even among the specialists.
Not only the nicotine that is coming from electronic cigarette could cause lung cancer.
The same.
I have a question for Derek.
Yeah.
When we presented to the Senate last week, our very first point came out was that within we've defined smoking to include the act of vaping. So now what they're saying is that smoking includes vaping. Now, believe it or not, out in BC, they've actually started to use that perspective that vaping is smoking to do some bans on outdoor bans. So this being pushed by the Canadian Cancer Society in terms of pushing the local municipalities and on the province with that perspective in mind. I don't understand how they can actually all of a sudden say, well, guess what, people? Smoking is now includes vaping. I don't understand.
Mm-hmm. Well, that seems to be the template. When we looked at the legislation from Canada to generate the report that I think I see around the room in some places, that was the standard template that provinces and municipalities have used. And some have even defined it so broadly as they catch things like those awful clay plugins, because it's something that's released into the air, intended to be inhaled, has sensory experience. It's like insects would be caught by it. And so they define them very broadly. And I think regardless of how they define it here, like I think I use scare quotes around the separate treatment. And I want to point out lifestyle advertising is banned for vaping.
No.
It says right here.
No. It's permitted in adult venues and in mailings to adults. It's not permitted.
Okay, so there's exceptions to the ban. Okay.
That's it. That's what. No, it's important. Derek, you're being misleading by doing that. You have to be clear about what the law says.
Yeah.
You have to be clear.
Let's see if we can squeeze in a couple more.
Just to be clear, it says that it's a ban and there's exceptions under it.
That's it. Well, you have
there's exceptions, so there's a ban.
That is clear. Just as a follow-up to NSRA's perspective, you know, they put a lot of faith in Health Canada and the politicians. We have seen over the last year and a half, that the province have said, well, yes, no problems. You come see us. We'll help you. We'll make these laws more helpful. And guess what? Every time they've said that, they've actually just quashed with those bills in Quebec, Ontario, Nova Scotia, BC. Yes, they'll be okay. They'll be good for view vapors. Not a chance. I don't trust politicians because they say that all the time. Health Canada, well, let's see. The proof is in the pudding by the actions that they take, not what they say.
I would like to follow
much time, so I want to
because of the issue of the legislation in Quebec. The reason why they inserted it in the Tobacco Act is that they didn't want to come out with a totally new legislation. It was a practical decision that they took to insert it inside an existing legislation. Is it the right idea? I don't think so. But it was it would have been better if, in fact, like what Health Canada is proposing, is coming out with a separate section for electronic cigarettes. Did they go too far or not? That's another issue.
It's still under tobacco. It's still under tobacco.
I think that it's very important that you understand why the reason that they did that it was because there's an existing regulatory framework that they've used. So they wanted to go the easy way. That's the reason.
Easy is not right.
I'm just saying. Shut up, Rizzo.
I'm David Sweeney. I've worked in this area for over a third of a century. I see a pattern here where, having been involved in many of the other things we've tried to do to reduce smoking, and the problem is a fundamental lack of imagination. That we're looking at an issue here on dealing with product where we have known for decades that it's the smoke that's the problem. But when we try to seize that opportunity, we were stuck with mindsets and we're only thinking of what might go wrong. And rather than seizing that opportunity to say, we could essentially end the epidemic of smoking causes disease. We could do it very rapidly. We could use market forces working for us. We can use differential regulation. We can give truthful information to consumers. We can encourage that change. And instead of doing that, to say, my gosh, how can we restrict this in order to try to prevent something from happening? I think that's the fundamental problem. We have faced it through the entire time I've worked on this issue, whether you're looking at restrictions on advertising, tax policy, or health warnings. There's always that pushback of, oh my gosh, we better not do it. And isn't that the fundamental problem? This lack of imagination of saying, my gosh, we can do something great. You know, that risk tolerance, seizing, profit maximization rather than this risk aversion. Let's only think of what might go wrong. I mean, isn't that the problem we face here and many of the other countries you try to do in the world?
I mean, absolutely. If you look at the purposes in the Act, it's about protecting young people, and the very last thing is to enhance public awareness of hazards.
Yeah.
There's no talk of promoting this as a healthy alternative.
All about risk,
to
not about
smoking.
benefit.
And it's, I mean, this is the thing. This is, you've got to get into this mindset of we have to control everything. I don't know if there's any politicians in there.
But that's because it's
But,
been embedded in a already existing template which was created for tobacco products.
Yeah.
And this probably goes back to what Francois was saying. This may create problems.
It will, absolutely.
For example, in the TPD, we have the same framework. However, we have a completely separate section on vapor products. It's in the same tobacco product directive, but it's being created in such a way that there'll be no mixing. When I look at the data as the
Okay, people, I'm going to just sign off for a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to see about getting interviews with our panel members. Okay, so hopefully you'll keep tuned afterwards. But I think so far it's been pretty good. Okay, guys? Thanks. I'll be back in about 10. Okay, bye.